I used to live in a big white house on James Island, a place close to Charleston. When I was 6, my dad died from a sickness called leukemia. One week he was laughing with me and teaching me how to ride my bike in the driveway, and the next week he was suddenly gone. Felt like the whole world broke. After the funeral, almost everyone stopped visiting, except Grandpa. Before I continue, don't forget to subscribe and join the awesome community. Drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what you think of the story. Grandpa's real name was Orrin Callahan. He used to be the police chief and everyone in the county knew him. Even after he retired, he still acted like he was protecting everyone. He traded his police badge for a fishing rod and a porch swing, but he was still strong, brave, and kind. Every weekend he drove his old blue Ford pickup to come see me. He brought me shrimp and grits from his favorite place at Shem Creek. He let me sit in the front seat and told me funny stories about chasing bootleggers down back roads when he was a young officer. He always made me laugh. He never forgot me, not once. To the world he was Chief Callahan. To me he was Grandpa. My mom, Vesper Carver, was very sad for about 1 year after Dad died. But then everything changed. She went to a charity party and met a man named Cashin Vale. Cashin was very rich. He built lots of new houses on Kiowa Island and drove a shiny black Range Rover that always smelled like new leather. 2 years later they had a fancy wedding on the beach. I was there wearing a pretty dress, but I barely remember anything because it didn't feel like my family anymore. 9 months later, my baby sister Nissa was born. Nissa had blonde hair, a loud cry, and she quickly became the center of everyone's attention. Suddenly, the house had a nanny, a nursery, and new rules. My bedroom got moved to a tiny corner room over the garage so Nissa could have the bigger room with the balcony. My soccer trophies disappeared into boxes in the attic. My clothes became hand-me-down uniforms from a private school I didn't even go to. My mom started calling me my older daughter when introducing me to people instead of saying my name. Cashin paid for everything, but he barely looked at me or talked to me. By the time I turned 14, I felt like a ghost living in my own house. The only place I truly felt happy was Grandpa's small brick house in West Ashley. It was about 20 minutes away across the big Ravenel Bridge. Grandpa kept my old bike in his garage. He always had popsicles in the freezer and warm blankets on the couch. He never asked why I came every weekend. He just hugged me gently and said, "Good to see you, baby girl." I felt safe there. When I was 16, Grandpa held his big Easter cookout like he did every year. He put 3 long tables under the giant live oak trees. There was shrimp, corn, crab, eggs, sweet tea in mason jars, and yummy banana pudding on the dessert table. Cousins I hadn't seen in years ran around laughing. The sun was shining without being too hot. Grandpa bought me a pale yellow dress that he said matched my eyes. I wore it proudly. For a few hours, it felt like I belonged somewhere again. But then something happened. I was walking near the dessert table when I heard my mom talking loudly on her phone. She was laughing happily. She said she and Nissa had booked a mother-daughter spa day the next morning. Massages, facials, everything. Then she said they were flying to the Bahamas for spring break. Just her, Cashin, and Nissa. Not me. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I stood there holding a plate of banana pudding while my hands started shaking. Grandpa noticed something was wrong. I told him I had a headache and wanted to go home early. He wanted me to stay, but I was too hurt and embarrassed. He handed me the keys to the 1998 Jeep Wrangler he helped me buy with my lifeguard money. He said, "Drive careful, baby girl. Text me when you get home, all right?" I nodded. I promised I would. It was getting dark when I drove onto the highway called I-26. A big spring storm came out of nowhere. The sky turned a strange green color. Rain poured so hard that my windshield wipers couldn't keep up. The road was slippery. Traffic slowed down. I turned the radio up to keep myself awake. It played one of Grandpa's old country songs. The lights from the cars around me became long, blurry streaks. Then everything happened at once. A huge tractor-trailer truck was ahead of me. The road was too wet and the truck driver lost control. The truck slid sideways across 3 whole lanes and smashed into the driver's side of my Jeep at very high speed. I heard metal scream. I heard glass exploding. My Jeep flipped 2 times. The roof pushed in. The Jeep slid upside down until it crashed into the concrete wall in the middle of the highway. I tasted blood. The seat belt cut into my shoulder. Then the world went silent. Far away I heard sirens. Then everything went black. When the ambulance brought me to MUSC Hospital, everything was loud and busy. Doctors shouted codes. Machines beeped. Nurses rushed around. They rolled my body into trauma bay 1. They cut off my clothes quickly. They put needles in both arms. They put a tube down my throat so I could breathe. One surgeon bent over me and said my injuries were extremely dangerous. Later I learned that my pelvis was broken. My spleen had burst. I was bleeding inside my skull. I only had about an hour before it could be too late. They needed a parent to say yes, so they could take me into surgery. I was still a kid. They had to call my mom. A nurse took my phone, found Mom's number and pressed FaceTime. It rang 3 times. Mom answered. She was lying on a spa table with a face mask on and cucumber slices over her eyes. Nissa was next to her watching TikTok. The nurse said, "Mrs. Vale, your daughter has been in a very serious car accident. We need your permission to do surgery immediately." The nurse tilted the phone so Mom could see my bloody face. A doctor stepped in and said, "Ma'am, your daughter has life-threatening injuries. We need your consent." My mom sighed like she was annoyed. Then she said, "If she doesn't make it, just call me later. We're in the middle of a treatment. I am not driving downtown to sign anything." The nurse froze. A doctor whispered, "Dear God." Someone behind her said, "Make sure this is recorded." Nissa even took a picture of me and sent it to her friends with a mean message that said, "Finally some peace." The nurse tried again. "Ma'am, this is required by law." But my mother interrupted her and said, "Call my father, Oren Callahan. He'll deal with it. We paid for a full day here." Then she hung up. The hospital called Grandpa. He was on his porch cleaning shrimp for dinner when he heard the words. Serenity, critical condition. He dropped everything. He jumped into his old Ford pickup, still wearing his apron and rubber boots. Rain poured down. Lightning lit up the sky. He drove as fast as he safely could across the Ashley River Bridge. Even though the trip normally took 25 minutes, he made it in 16. He burst through the hospital doors soaking wet. His old police badge was still clipped to his belt. The charge nurse recognized him and waved him through without waiting. Grandpa signed every paper they gave him. His hand shook so hard the pen scratched the paper. But his signature saved my life. They let him see me for a moment before surgery. I was covered in tubes and swollen, but he touched my hand and whispered, "I'm here, baby girl. I'm not leaving you." I didn't wake up for 18 whole days. When I finally opened my eyes, I saw light shining through a window. I heard beeping noises. I felt sore everywhere. Then I saw my hospital chart at the end of my bed. Something was different. My mother's name wasn't listed as my legal guardian anymore. Dad had said, Oren Callahan. Grandpa. The person who came for me. The person who cared. The person who saved me. If you have ever watched the people who are supposed to love you turn their backs when you needed them the most, you're not alone. I've seen it. I lived it. But someone else can love you. Someone else can choose you. Someone else can show up. Grandpa did. And my story only gets more unbelievable from here. He leaned close to my ear and whispered the same words he used to say when I was small and woke up from scary nightmares. His voice was soft and warm. He said, "I've got you, baby girl. Grandpa is right here." Those words always made me feel safe when I was little, and they made me feel safe now too, even though everything around me felt frightening. Then the nurses rushed me toward the surgery room. Lights flashed above me. People moved quickly, talking in serious voices. Doors swung open. Grandpa followed until he wasn't allowed to go any farther. He pulled a heavy metal chair up to the glass wall where he could see the hallway outside the operating room, and he sat down. He didn't get up for the next 9 hours. He didn't move when nurses asked if he wanted coffee. He didn't move when the waiting room emptied and went quiet. He didn't move even when a loud storm outside struck the building so hard that the electricity went out for 12 whole minutes. The lights flickered and everything went dark for a moment, but then the backup machines turned on with a loud hum. Grandpa didn't turn his head or shift his boots. He just kept watching the doors and praying silently. When doctors finally rolled me out of surgery and into the ICU, the sky outside was turning pale with the first morning light. Grandpa stood up quickly and followed the bed down the hallway. He still held my hand, the same cold hand that had stopped moving hours before. His face was tired, but his grip on my hand was strong and steady. The next 18 days became the longest days Grandpa ever lived. The ICU smelled like cleaning spray, medicine, and something sharp that reminded people of worry. Machines beeped and hissed all day and night. Their sounds never stopped and always reminded everyone how thin and delicate life could be. Grandpa didn't leave my side. He found a vinyl recliner beside my bed, an old squeaky brown chair, and claimed it like it belonged to him. He sat down in it and stayed there. When nurses tried to send him home to sleep, he quietly showed them the old badge that he still carried in his wallet from his years as an officer. He just said, "I'm not going anywhere." After that, nobody tried to make him leave again. Grandpa slept in tiny naps that lasted only 30 minutes at a time. Sometimes he slept sitting up, his head tilted back, his mouth open a little, his boots still on. When he woke up, he always talked to me. His voice stayed low so the machines wouldn't drown him out. He talked about happy things. He told stories he knew I liked. He told me about the night I was born and how he got to hold me first because my mom was too exhausted. He told me again about the summer when I was 8 and we caught a 5-foot-long shark at the Folly Beach Pier. He reminded me how I screamed until he let me reel it in by myself even though the shark almost pulled me toward the water. When he wasn't telling stories, he read aloud from his worn-out old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He kept that book in his truck all the time and he knew exactly how to read it in funny voices. Some evenings he didn't talk at all. He just hummed an old hymn, a gentle, slow song that his mother used to sing to him when he was a little boy. It was the same song he sang to me when I was little and fell asleep on his couch. Even though I couldn't open my eyes, I heard it deep inside my mind like warm sunlight. Doctors came and went, their shoes clicking on the shiny floor. One morning, the neurologist said the swelling in my brain was going down. Grandpa nodded quietly. Another day, the bone doctor said my pelvis might never heal perfectly straight. Grandpa nodded again. He asked questions in a calm, strong voice, questions sharp enough to make the young doctors nervous. When they left, he went right back to holding my hand like nothing had changed. Then, on day 16, something wonderful happened. The numbers on the machines started moving in the right direction. My blood pressure got better. The breathing machine didn't have to work as hard. A nurse saw Grandpa smiling for the first time in 2 whole weeks. That same afternoon, as Grandpa leaned close and whispered that the red fish were running and we would go fishing as soon as I woke up, a tall man in a dark navy suit appeared at the glass ICU door. His name was Mr. Dorian. He had worked with Grandpa 25 years ago when they were younger. They still played poker together once a month. Grandpa looked up, saw the thick folder in Dorian's hand and gave one slow nod. He didn't say a word. Mr. Dorian turned and left the hospital. He walked to his silver Lexus, started the engine and drove straight to James Island. He knew the address by heart. At the house, Vespera and Nissa stood in the front hallway, surrounded by fancy designer luggage. 2 matching bright pink suitcases sat by the door with tags on them for a 7-night Royal Caribbean cruise leaving the next morning from Charleston Harbor. Cashin was upstairs on a work call. Nissa was spinning in a new sundress, filming herself for Instagram. Vesper was checking passports again and again. Then the doorbell rang. Mr. Dorian introduced himself politely, handed Vespera the thick envelope and waited. Vespera ripped it open. Inside were 2 sets of very serious papers. One said the court would take away her rights as a parent because she didn't take care of me when I needed help. The other was a lawsuit from the hospital asking for money to pay for the life-saving care and for the pain I went through. Both sets had Vespera's name, and because Nissa was 14 and had been part of the refusal, her name was there too. Vespera's face went pale under her spray tan. Nissa stopped twirling mid-spin. She froze like a statue. "You have 72 hours to respond," Mr. Dorian said calmly. "After that, the judge will hold an emergency hearing." Vespera started yelling. She shouted about lawyers and mistakes and how dare anyone question her parenting. Nissa burst into dramatic tears, saying she didn't mean anything by the messages she sent. But Mr. Dorian didn't stay to argue. He turned and walked back to his car. Inside the house, Vespera slid down the wall holding the papers, black mascara dripping like dark rain down her cheeks. Nissa kept screaming that her spring break was ruined. Cashin came downstairs, looked at the documents and turned very pale. Back in the hospital, Grandpa never said a word about the visitor. He just kept holding my hand and humming that same soft hymn, waiting for me to come back to him. 2 days later I opened my eyes. Everything hurts. Every part of me felt heavy. My mouth tasted like metal and plastic. The machines still beeped, but they sounded quieter now. The first face I saw was Grandpa's tired, Nissa face. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his smile was so wide I thought his cheeks would split. "Hey baby girl," he whispered. Welcome back. I tried to talk but only a scratchy sound came out. He pressed the nurse call button and then picked up the whiteboard at the foot of my bed so I could see it. Written in big black letters were the words, Legal Guardian, Orrin Callahan. That was Grandpa's name. I stared until my eyes watered. Tears rolled sideways into my ears. Grandpa wiped them away with his thumb, which still smelled faintly like shrimp and salt air. In the next hours, between nurse visits and doctors shining lights in my eyes, Grandpa told me everything. He told me about the FaceTime call. He told me what my mom said. He told me about Nissa's screenshots. He told me how the papers were delivered while I lay unconscious. Grandpa didn't sugarcoat anything. He never did. I cried again, but not because of pain, because I felt a relief so deep it felt like sinking into a warm, safe ocean. 3 weeks later, the hospital let me go home. But not to James Island. I went home to Grandpa's little gray house on stilts in Folly Beach, just 15 minutes south of the city. When Grandpa carried me inside, the salty air rushed into my lungs. The house felt small, cozy, and full of love. Grandpa had turned his old fishing tackle room into my new bedroom. He painted the walls a soft, quiet blue and hung up the wind chimes we made together when I was 9. From my window I could see the ocean rolling in and rolling out, steady and endless. The sound made me feel calm. Physical therapy started the next Monday. I learned how to sit up again, then stand, then shuffle behind a walker while Grandpa stayed right beside me like I was a toddler learning to walk. Every night he cooked shrimp and grits because it was soft enough for my jaw, which was still wired shut. We watched the sunset from the porch swing, Grandpa's arm around my shoulders, neither of us needing to talk. One afternoon my phone buzzed. It was my mom. I watched it ring 10 times. Grandpa stood quietly in the doorway. I pressed decline, set the phone face down and went back to the porch. That was the only time she ever called. Across town, Cashin filed for divorce. He didn't want his company connected to a child abandonment case. He moved out quickly, taking only his clothes and golf clubs. Nissa yelled on social media for 3 days before colleges saw everything and took away her scholarship offers. Then she fell silent. Grandpa never brought it up unless I asked. When I did, he simply said, "They made their choice, Ren. Now we make ours." Some nights pain woke me in tears. Grandpa hurried to my room wearing his old police academy sweatshirt, sat beside me and held my hand until the medicine worked. Other nights, I woke to the sound of Grandpa praying in the living room, asking God to give him enough years to see me healed. Soon the stitches came out. The casts turned into braces. I learned to walk the whole pier without stopping. Grandpa bought 2 fishing rods and a bucket of shrimp. We sat at the end of the pier where the water turned deep green. We didn't catch much, but we didn't need to. The sun warmed my face. The ocean breeze smelled like home. One evening, as I looked out at the endless ocean, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not a second chance I never wanted. The ocean kept moving, steady and calm. A couple months later, the day of the court hearing arrived. The courthouse smelled like old wood and floor wax. I walked in on crutches, Grandpa on one side, Mr. Dorian on the other. And for the first time in a long time I felt safe. My mother sat at the defendant's table in the courtroom. A defendant is a person who is in trouble and must talk to a judge. She wore a navy blue suit that was too big for her, like she borrowed it from someone else. Her eyes looked puffy, like she had cried or not slept, and she wasn't wearing any makeup at all. She looked tired and small. Nissa, my sister, sat beside her. She wore her private school blazer, but she wasn't sitting tall like she usually did. Instead, she slouched down and stared at the floor as if she didn't want to look at anyone or anything around her. The judge was a woman with steel gray hair. Her hair looked sharp and strong, just like her face. She looked like a person who didn't have time for nonsense or excuses. She pushed up her glasses and told the bailiff, the helper in the courtroom, to play the recording. The FaceTime video appeared on a giant screen in front of everyone. It showed me lying on a hospital gurney, which is like a bed with wheels. My body was broken and hurt from the accident. There was soft spa music playing in the background of the video, which made everything feel strange, like something peaceful was mixed with something scary. Then everyone heard my mother's voice. It was clear and very cold. She said, "If she doesn't make it, just call me when it's over." Then Nissa's laugh played. The people watching could see a picture she took of my bloody face. Under the picture she wrote a mean and ugly message. The whole courtroom went completely quiet. A juror sitting in the back even gasped like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Dorian, the lawyer helping me, put phone records on the judge's desk next. They showed that Nissa had sent that picture to 7 different group chats in only 4 minutes. One of the messages said, "One less person stealing my spring break." The judge stopped writing with her pen. She looked up and stared at my mother, not quickly but for a long, hard moment, like she couldn't believe a parent would ever say or do such a thing to their own child. "Mrs. Vale," the judge finally said, her voice sharp and cold, "in 23 years on this bench, I have never heard a parent speak about their child this way while that child was fighting for her life." Then she made her decision right then and there. "Temporary full custody is given to Mr. Oren Callahan starting today," she said. "We will meet again for the permanent hearing." Then she hit her gavel so hard that the echo bounced all around the marble courtroom walls. The sound felt final, like a door slamming shut forever. 3 days later, my mother, Vespra, was fired from her job at the South Carolina State Credit Union. People who work with federal money must pass special checks to make sure they can be trusted. Medical neglect of a child, meaning she didn't try to help me when I needed her, is something that makes you fail immediately. Security guards walked her out of the building while she held a cardboard box filled with her things. Around the same time, Nissa lost her full-ride academic scholarship to the College of Charleston. The school said her behavior did not match the values they wanted their students to have. The private high school that used to treat her like she was perfect now whispered about her behind her back. Within a month, their house on James Island went into foreclosure, which means they couldn't pay for it anymore and the bank took it. Cashin's name wasn't on the house anymore. He had taken it off earlier to protect his own money. Vespra and Nissa had to move into a small 2-bedroom apartment off Savannah Highway. The paint on the walls was peeling and the elevator didn't even work. Nissa lost her car too. To pay the rent, Vespra worked nights at a grocery store putting boxes on the shelves. While all this was happening to them, my own life was slowly getting better. I began real therapy. A van came to our house twice a week to take me to physical therapy at MUC. The helpers there taught me how to climb stairs again, how to stand on a Bosa ball without falling, and how to trust my legs again after everything they went through. Grandpa drove me to every appointment and sat in the waiting area reading the same 3 fishing magazines while I worked hard and sweated and sometimes cried. On Thursdays, I met with a trauma counselor named Dr. Kalira. We sat in a small office that smelled like lavender. She listened to me talk about my nightmares, my fear, my sadness, and the heavy anger I carried. I talked about the moment I knew I never wanted to hear my mother's voice again. While I talked, Grandpa waited in his truck, windows down, country music turned low. He never complained, not once, even when the heat was awful. Some afternoons when my hips hurt too much, I sat on the back deck and threw little pieces of bread to the seagulls. Grandpa sat beside me with 2 sweet teas and watched the water go out with the tide. He never tried to force me to be happy or calm. He just stayed, which was even better. By the end of summer, I no longer needed crutches. Then I stopped needing a cane too. I still walked with a tiny limp, but the doctor said it would almost disappear by my 18th birthday. One evening, I walked all the way to the end of the Folly Pier and back without stopping. Grandpa met me halfway with a blanket and a flashlight even though the sun was still shining. We sat on the sand together with our shoes off and let the waves touch our toes. I rested my head on his shoulder. "Thank you for staying," I told him. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Nowhere else I'd rather be, baby girl." 7 months after the crash, the final trial came. When I walked into the courtroom, I didn't need crutches or a cane. The scar on my forehead was still pink, but I held my head high. Grandpa sat behind me wearing his Sunday suit, the same one he wore to my father's funeral. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back very tightly and she held a tissue she never used. Nissa stared forward with her arms crossed tightly. When Dorian called me to the stand, I promised to tell the truth. He asked me, "Tell the court how it felt knowing your mother refused to come while you were dying." I took a breath. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "It felt like the last piece of me that believed I mattered died on that table," I said. "I learned in one moment that I was disposable. And the person who showed me that was the same woman who used to read me bedtime stories." I told the courtroom about waking up and seeing Grandpa's name as my guardian. I talked about the one call my mother made that I never answered. I talked about how I fell asleep to ocean sounds instead of wondering why I wasn't enough for her. My mother's lawyer tried to explain her behavior by saying she was stressed, overwhelmed, and going through too much. He talked about her job loss, the house foreclosure, and her divorce. I didn't look at her once. When he finished, the judge asked me, "Do you have anything else to say?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I don't want her money. I don't want her apologies. I just want this to be over. I already have a family." The judge left for just 20 minutes. When she returned, she gave her final decision. "Permanent termination of parental rights for betrayal," she said. That meant my mother was no longer my mother in the eyes of the law. Civil judgment in favor of the plaintiff and the hospital, $480,000. The James Island property will be sold to satisfy the debt. Then she looked at Grandpa. Mr. Orrin Callahan is granted full legal adoption. The gavel cracked loudly. The case was over. Outside the courtroom, reporters shouted questions, but I ignored all of them. I took Grandpa's arm and we stepped into the bright October sun. 3 weeks later, the bank locked the big white house. A moving truck came and took the little bit my mother and Nissa kept. They put boxes into an old car and drove north on the highway toward somewhere cheaper and quieter. I never asked where they went. That same month, the adoption papers came in the mail. I signed Serenity Callahan for the first time and cried harder than the day I woke up from the coma. Grandpa framed the adoption certificate and hung it beside my father's old service photo. I started my senior year at a small alternative school near Folly Beach. The classes were small and the teachers were kind and caring. No one knew my story unless I told them. I made the honor roll every quarter and got accepted early to the College of Charleston. Graduation day was warm and windy. I wore a pale blue cap and gown, the same color as the walls in my room at Grandpa's house. When they called my name, the whole senior class stood and cheered because they all knew who helped me survive and grow. Grandpa waited for me at the bottom of the steps wearing his dress uniform, his medals shining. I ran to him, wrapped my arms around him, and let him lift me into the air like I weighed nothing. 5 years have passed since Easter Sunday. I'm 21 now. I have a psychology diploma on my wall. I work as a family trauma counselor at a nonprofit in Mount Pleasant. Every day I sit across from teenagers who think no one will ever choose them. I tell them they are wrong because someone chose me when the people who were supposed to love me most didn't even care enough to stay. Grandpa turned 77 last month. He still cuts his own grass. He still catches more fish than any boat captain nearby. He still cooks the best shrimp and grits in the whole state. The house on stilts looks the same. Wind chimes singing, porch swing creaking, coffee pot bubbling. My old room is still pale blue. Most nights we eat on the deck and watch dolphins jump in the waves. He calls me baby girl once a day, usually when he hands me a sweet tea. And I still call him Grandpa. It's perfect. Vespra and Nissa left South Carolina 3 years ago. Someone said they now live in Georgia in a trailer under new last names. I never looked for them. They never looked for me. The silence between us feels clean. It feels final. It feels like peace. People ask if I'm angry. I'm not. Anger takes too much energy. I'd rather spend mine living. People ask if I forgive them. Forgiveness is something they'd have to earn and they never even tried. So I let the past stay behind me. What I keep with me instead is the deepest gratitude. Gratitude for the man who sat in a hard hospital chair for 18 nights. Gratitude for the retired fire chief who never missed a single therapy appointment. Gratitude for the grandfather who turned his house into my home and his heart into my safe place. Family isn't the people who share your blood. Family is the person who stays. Family is the one who holds your hand when everything hurts. Family is the one who signs the papers, dries your tears, and never makes you feel like a burden. And that will always be Grandpa.